Hello everyone and welcome to Playoffs Week, Content Week. Here is the first bit of content I've managed to crank out after a couple of things I kind of fallen through on. Here I am with the eponymous Danny Locke themselves. Say hello.
Hello, everybody. I am here to ramble for a little while with my friend Electric.
Truly. You're coming with exactly the right stuff for my type of content. So the question today is there Mush Room? As can be exhibited by Daddy and his child. We're really here to ask if, what's the line from Slow and Steady wins the race? That's what I was trying to remember.
Yeah. We'll cut this out. We'll make it sound nice in post.
Oh, no, I don't do any post.
Yeah, nobody does.
No, some people do, and that's why it's hilarious. I mean, like, Heaven, for example, does a ton of post, and we appreciate it.
Bro, yeah. Yeah, Heaven's videos are sick.
Heaven's videos are really cool. So, yeah, we're looking at Trick Room and using examples from, I think, to explain how different teams approach Trick Room. It's interesting looking at this. So we're looking at the different playoffs. So there were 4 different divisions or conferences, whichever one they're called, and then 4 players made playoffs in each of them. So we looked at the different teams and how they approach Trick Room as a concept, and we kind of like categorized them a bit differently.
Yeah, I guess what we're kind of interested in here is like how strong was Trick Room when we look at playoff teams versus non-playoff teams, and how strong were teams that basically were set up to counter Trick Room, like they really didn't want to get a set, right?
Is that
what you said? It's kind of
we kind of want to look at the different philosophies, right?
Yeah.
Because it's less about, did this team perform, but more about why did this team perform? What about this works? How can we look at this and be like, okay, this is how you should interact with Trick Room next time you're in a draft?
Yeah, and I think to preface a little bit, we looked at so many different things to kind of find out what sort of interesting patterns were there. First, we talked about Electric's alignment chart, and we noticed that teams made the playoffs that were extremely wide, and teams that were extremely top-heavy also made the playoffs. So we didn't see a lot of patterons there, but we did kind of notice some patterns
just to
with
kind of
Trick
push
Room.
this in. I will show you the. Okay, so this is the. No, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to save most of it off screen. Okay. No, I guess that is a concern. So this was the playoffs thing here for the top heavy and wide for Daddy conference, which is or Div. I don't remember which ones are divs and which ones are conferences.
Divs are smaller, conferences are larger.
So this is for the Daddy conference. What we did, as we can see, there's a lot of the tempo and top heavy. When I first did this one, like, okay, maybe there's something here. We're seeing mostly in these one, and then Dan's team is an outlier. And then we looked at this one, and it looks kind of like the opposite. So we've got teams making playoffs from all of the different quadrants, which I think speaks probably that maybe one draft philosophy may not be universal,
Agreed.
So
yeah, we kind of settled on discussing Trick Room here because I would say we noticed a pattern, especially in the Daddy conference, and you'll see a lot of mons on slide 2 here that really stood out on the playoff teams.
Yeah, so we looked at all of the teams who went number 1, and we looked at how they had approached Trick Room to compare it to some of the other teams. So, had a top seed. You kind of want 2 main things on a team, which is to say, Spritzy, and then some Pokemon that isn't Spritzy. But if you are in the unfortunate position of Spritzy having already been taken, what you kind of want is having a strong Trick Room setup, and then also having other options to be able to dissuade Trick Room, so that your team can function out of Trick Room, but does have the option. Because I think most of your Pokemon were on Trick Room comps, right? Like, I don't think you ever brought Duskmar to a team and then said, I don't want to bring insert fast Pokemon because I'm setting Trick Room.
Yeah, even the Tauros came to a lot of matches where I wanted Trick Room set up.
Yeah.
And you see that with teams like Tays as well. I think Tay will bring a Trick Room mode, but then also like a very strong fast mode with some speed control alongside it, right?
Yeah. So they'll have, like we saw both of those teams, and I think a little bit at lesser extent with Sora's team, but also still with Poppin's team, where they will have a Trick Room option, and then they'll have the Trick Room setter come often, I mean, so with you, I think they often didn't even have Trick Room, but even when you did, you'd have them not set Trick Room, and you just play fast mode with offense. And I think that those sorts of mons stood out. Uxie, even on James's team, which didn't wind up making playoffs, stood out as a mon which set Trick Room, but also did a lot of stuff alongside it. Whereas we saw a little bit less success from mons that were kind of hyper-dedicated Trick Room sort of mons. And we saw Trick Room in Prison, but also actual Trick Room setting from mons like Orbital, like Galacuno, like Sigilif, from these top seed teams. At least threatening running Trick Room. So you kind of really brought Trick Room as part of a package of mons, all of which could function in and out of Trick Room, but functioned either better or worse than Trick Room, right?
Yeah, you see things like Articuno and Rapidash on there. And Siglif also, right? They are definitely there. They can definitely set Trick Room. They generally do not want to be in it themselves. But it's kind of that surprise factor, right? Like, just for example, I ran that Scarf Trick Room last week, which I think was a cool tech, you know?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting tech. I mean, I think we saw a Galacuno that had both Trick Room and Tailwind, just to kind of respond to the opponent's prep from Sora. And it's like, having a team which can function in Trick Room, in Tailwind, and outside of Trick Room really did seem to be a standout for what made a team really good, because it basically shuts down whatever your opponent's trying to do very effectively. I think it's really getting the concept.
Agreed. Sorry, the delay is kind of messing me up. I feel like something like Articuno is a little bit stronger on Sora's team. Would you agree? Because he can kind of go fast or slow, whereas Jace generally wanted to go fast. So if he's running Trick Room on Articuno, it's either because the other team wanted to go really fast, or because more likely he wanted to imprison or like counter Trick Room with it.
Or just wants to hit mons with it as well. I think that's a pretty significant thing. Like, of these mons, the only mon I think which is a bit passive is Uxie, and we even saw offense coming out of Uxie in some games, and its support was really, really good. Like all of these mons were pretty strong. All of these mons did damage throughout the season.
Yeah, I guess the only one that would be Spritzy, which regardless of how much
strong
damage,
it's got more attack than Cofagrigus, doesn't it?
Yeah, you might be right. I guess
something. Spritzy's one of those weird baby Pokemon. Yeah, it can run body press.
Koff can have a little more diversity in its move pool, I feel like, where Spritzy is kind of like Trick Room after you.
Oh no, it's only 63 attack. But he just clicks Moonblast, and Moonblast is such a strong mon that it kind of covers for it.
Right. Yeah, and then something like Uxie, like, it's really bulky, it's really nice for setting Trick Room, but also its bulk and its not terrible attacking stats mean that it can 2-hit KO some mons, so it can also go a little offensive, right?
And it's got a decent support offensive move pool, so you can Dazzling Gleam or Psychic mons to get them in range of your other mons as well. So these sorts of mons really enabled whether they were themselves the killers like Dusknoir was, like Cofagrigus was, or Articuno was, or they were mons which more functioned to enable other killers to still get damage, to pick off sashes, to deal with chip, to kind of get through berries. That's really, I think, what a lot of these other sorts of mons excelled in. I think Orbital had like one set that it really showed up in. I think it did set Trick Room, and it did do enough damage. I think there was another set it showed up in where it like ran a defensive setup variant, but that's a little more ancillary to the current thing.
Rapidash also is another one. We saw it show up really big for Sora. And it obviously is a mon with a lot of weaknesses, but also the versatility of its move pool, I think makes it really strong, because it's one of those mons like you have to be ready for Imprison Trick Room coming from it every week, but it definitely does not need to bring it. It has so many moves, and fairy types are pretty strong in our Daddy Plan Part 2.
Yeah, psychic types as well. I think there were 1 or 2 teams that didn't have a dark type. There were definitely 1 or 2 teams that didn't have a steel type.
Yeah, and Rapidash is not a mon that's going to win games for you every week, but as we saw with Sora, that one, what was it, week 6 maybe? Week 5, I don't remember, but it showed up really big, and I know that he brought it on a misclick, I believe.
Yeah, that was fun.
But it went wild, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think
And when
he came to 2 games once. I think it was specs one time, and then one time it was like regular. I don't know if it had Imprison and Trick Room, but it threatens it, right? And if you
it's
see
something
that
you
at
have to be
lead,
ready for.
and then it clicks specs move, you're definitely set back a bit.
Yeah, it's a mon that you have to kind of be ready for it. I think I spent more time prepping for it against Bohm than maybe I should have, but just the fact that it's there. And you and I were talking about Sylveon. I know this is a little bit off topic,
Yeah.
but I feel like that's kind of another one of those mons where, and you saw it with Sam and myself, it doesn't have to come every week, but your opponent has to get ready for it, right?
And not just that, but both of the, like, when Sylveon comes, it does a lot.
Yeah, more than Rapidash probably, but...
Yeah, but you're also playing a lot more than you are for Rapidash.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, Sylveon, a terrible mon. No one would ever bring it to a playoffs game, seriously, I imagine.
Yeah, who would do that?
Yeah.
Not me. Or would
Yeah, definitely never. It's just got a terrible matchup into Magma,
I feel like Spritzy is kind of the outlier on this slide a little bit, although
It
I
performed.
will say, after talking with you a little bit more about Spritzy and seeing it more this season, did we agree that it's a top 3 fairy, or?
I was joking about the concept of a top 3 fairy.
Yeah,
I mean, Alolan Ninetales was the best performing fairy.
right.
Like, on one team, it outperformed both of the Sylveons combined.
Mm-hmm.
They got picked up by another team in, like, week 7, which is last week. And, it got, like, 1 kill. That's fine. But, positionally, Alolan Ninetales offers a lot of stuff. But is it a fairy type, like you were saying? I mean, it clicked Moonblast,
Right.
does that make it a fairy type? Rabombi, my Rabombi basically just spammed fairy moves, and it did a lot of damage. Sylveon spammed fairy moves, it did a lot of damage. But then if you look at Spritzy, it used its fairy type defensively pretty effectively on both Poppin and Tay's teams. Even though I think it only came to 1 series for Tay, because he picked it up relatively late in the season.
Yeah, I guess what kind of sets Spritzy apart from the rest of the mons that we see on this slide is that generally it's running similar movesets. A little bit less of a surprise, but also something you might not prep for as much.
The other thing I would note about it is that it is the slowest mon on this slide by a decent margin. You've got
By a mile,
Pythagoras at 30, where you're often risking speed ties with a lot of opposing Trick Room mons and anti-Trick Room mons. But in this format, where a Scavalier wasn't legal, often Stack Attacker also wasn't legal, and then what's the other? Really Snorlax wasn't legal. Spritzy is often going to be the slowest thing on the field, which means that it's the best after Ua, I think, in the format.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. And we also see it on both of the, or 2 of the undefeated teams, the only undefeated teams, actually.
Yeah,
So
both the 2 teams that were undefeated, both at Spritzy. It came to some games, not a lot of games, but some games, and did work in them.
yeah, so stronger than I thought, probably stronger than a lot of people thought.
I think it's
and
probably
for
one
2
of the
points.
most effective 2 points. I mean, we came off the back of VBL-N doing a Little Cup league, and Spritzy has been a really effective mon in singles Little Cup for a very long time, and it was really good in VGC Little Cup as well.
Yeah, and I think Poppin had it there, right?
Yeah. He's a bit addicted, but we love him.
Yeah,
so it's
get
fine.
over it, Poppin. Drop it. Just
Yeah. If we see it in playoffs, we're gonna have an intervention.
yeah, right. So the next slide is the more hard Trick Room,
So-
which I think maybe Spritzy might belong here a little more. But I guess
Well,
Spritzy was
Spritzy
on
just sits
teams-
there and clicks helping hands,
True. Yeah, that's fair. Or Yawn, right?
Yeah. I don't think it gets Yawn, but yes. That basic concept.
But if it did, you could imagine, right?
Yeah, if it did. So, a lot of these weren't. So this is here. We've got Oranguru and Mesprit. Both, I think, were with a Marowak. Or
Yes.
did Sam have a Marowak?
Sam had regular Marowak. Yes.
Yes. Okay. So Oranguru was
And,
with regular Marowak with both the regular Marowaks. Mesprit was here with the Lola Marowak. And the Marowak is such an incredibly oppressive mon that you have to respect it. Carbink and Behemoth were both really strong Trick Room setters and abusers for Steve, though Carbink also was one of the greatest tech strats of all time. And then we have Heracross's team, which went 5-2, and it was super hard dedicated Trick Room. Only mon over 70 speed was Electabuzz. I don't know if they have a poor Electabuzz. They might have. I didn't check.
I don't think so.
Like, it might have come to a team preview. I don't think it hit the field.
Yeah, not that I can recall, at least.
And I did Value Town, so I would have checked. I think it did come to a team preview.
And we see a third of Heracross's team on here. So obviously, we also discussed another. We had such a hard time coming up with a topic for this video. We knew we wanted to make some playoff content. We thought about talking about the PRs, and everybody had Heracross's team ranked very low. And one of the reasons was because it was so hard Trick Room. What do you think was one of the causes that we saw so much success from this team, even though everybody kind of knew what Heracross was trying to do?
So this is the thing I was thinking about, right? Is that there are a lot of different ways to kind of come up with what you're doing in a draft. So this is the thing I was talking about, is that, like, you were like, oh, well, Heracross's team kind of fell apart in the last couple of weeks. And I'm like, well, no, when you're drafting a team like this, you're not trying to go 7-0, right? Heracross went 5-2. And there was one of those games where, there was some RNG to it. I think they crit a Focus Blast, which is, not the highest odds thing. But that's still a 4-3 team that's safely making playoffs without that.
Right.
So then, if you're looking at that and you're saying this team is bad, well, it was functionally 4-3 without having to try to do anything particularly innovative. Because it was just so good at the one thing it did that, like, all of these Trick Room modes are things that people have to respect in prep. People have to respect, like, 10 of the mons. Okay, maybe not the Slowpoke collab, maybe 9 of the mons. Coming in Trick Room, like, with him on top as a really consistent fake out, a Glastrier, and I think there was another mon that was, like, a super consistent abuser. Porygon 2, Slowbro, and Reuniclus are all really strong themselves in Trick Room. Porygon 2 outside of Trick Room as well. Like, everyone had to try and prep super hard for that. It's just a different sort of philosophy, in my opinion, where he's like, okay, I want you to have to try a lot harder than I do to win the game, because I don't have to try that hard. I know that my team is good. I will probably make playoffs without having to do anything particularly out of the order, because I just drafted a team with really solid fundamentals. I drafted a team that looks like it can perform on ladder, and that's exactly what they did. They had a good season. It wasn't an amazing season, but they had a bunch of really consistent games. And then towards the end of the season, they played some really good coaches who also had good options into Trick Room, and then they started losing games off of that. Going 5-2 or 4-3, when you're not making a particularly innovative team, when you're not, like, really having to push yourself week to week to try and come up with how you're going to counter the other ones, forcing your opponent to be the one coming to you, is a really interesting way to make a team, and it worked out pretty successfully, I'd say.
Yeah, I would say so too. Also, pretty decently high base stat totals on the team.
Well, that's one of the main advantages of Trick Room mons, is that when mons have low speed, they often have higher, like, bulk and attack, which is like 4 stats.
That's something else that I kind of noticed when looking at all the teams that made playoffs. A lot of those teams that try to run more niche strategies seem to be slightly less successful, but again, it's kind of hard to find patterns when you have 32 teams and the draft strategies are all so different. So
I mean, clearly what we would need is more like 3,200 teams, right?
Yeah, let's just expand the league a little bit more.
Just a little bit,
Yeah, pick it up, Sam. Come on.
Yeah. I reckon that's the strat.
Yeah.
One draft ball though.
Yeah. I don't know what else is there to say about hard Trick Room.
Look, even when it is just 1 or 2 tech mons, but it's 2 really key pieces, it's incredibly impressive. And one of the great things about Rangaroo and Meshbrit is that they are really good out of Trick Room, but by putting them with a Marowak on the team, every single week your opponent has to respect Trick Room. And I thought that was something that really impressed me about that team, about Sam's team, because he often would bring Trick Room or not bring Trick Room. And whether he brought it or not, his opponent had to respect it, and when he did bring it, it tended to work.
Yeah, and I think the same kind of applies for Steve's team, right? Like, you had to respect his Trick Room mode, and sometimes he would bring something like Behem just to counter your potential Trick Room mode, because that is for 4 points.
Carbink.
Yeah,
Yeah, and you had to respect the Trick Room while they're getting the sturdy skill swap into the Shedinja, you know?
And influencing
It's like, what are you doing?
prep. Yeah, influencing your opponent's prep is huge.
Yeah.
And those coaches definitely used it to their advantage and made playoffs.
One of the great things is it doesn't just influence prep, but it also influences the way that they lead to a much stronger degree than most other options do.
Mm-hmm.
And when, like, I mean, I know that one of the games I lost, well, when I lost to Tay, a lot of it came down to I wanted to hedge for them leading Trick Room and them also not leading Trick Room. And that's very difficult to do because they often require very different counterplay.
Yeah, and I think at least in part that's what kind of separates the 1 seed teams from the 3 and 4s, at least a little bit, right? When you look at a team like Taze or a team like mine or Poppins, it's a lot harder to pick your leads if you're looking.
I mean, that's what the thing was great about yours is that like you could lead the Trick Room on and then not click Trick Room, and it still works.
Right. Yeah, and the same definitely applies to Tay, but with Heracross, you kind of know what's coming generally.
Yeah.
Which doesn't mean it's bad. Right.
It doesn't mean it's bad. It's just going to be, I think, a little bit less consistent. Or consistent's probably the weird word. Like, it's going to perform less well, even though it's going to be more consistent in terms of what you're bringing.
Yeah, and I personally kind of feel like that teams like Heracrosses might struggle a little bit more in playoffs because a lot of the teams you're going to see are going to be more balanced.
Yeah. But I mean, that's the question. What was Heracross looking for out of the season? Were they just looking to get into playoffs? I think this was their first ever draft league. And, you know,
yeah,
if that's just what they're looking for, if, you know, they're a ladder player and they feel comfortable running Trick Room, I mean, it's a good way, I think, to get introduced to the format.
Yeah, and with the right matchups, even in playoffs, you can just run away with it.
For example, you know, if they play me.
Right.
Which brings us on to our next thing. Imprison. Free my mans. He didn't do nothing.
Nothing. Yeah, so of course we see the Sigilyph and the Articuno that we talked about earlier.
Yes, but these are different ones. These are
true.
These are Jaces and Gooses.
It's not the same Sigilyph and Articuno, okay?
They're just both in 1st seed and 4th seed.
Yeah, we should have put shinies or something.
Oh, yeah, I should have done that. But yeah, I did literally copy the paste, so they're scaled to the same size as the other ones were. And then there's also Sly and my imprisoned ghosties. With the Duskull and the Pumpkin.
Sly's team is really interesting because we always talk about Sly as such a top-heavy coach, but Sly really has other options that you might see come up in playoffs. Like you were talking about how scary Fungus can be.
Fungus is top-heavy. It was like 8 points.
True, but it's not one of his big 6, right?
I think when I was talking about his team, I said his team had 7 mods. When I was like making the alignment chart, and the 7th mod was definitely it was definitely Fungus. Fungus is terrifying. That mod's scary.
You think so? I don't. Yeah. Okay. All right. Fine. Fine.
No, I would say it's top heavy, but there's a reason I didn't put it all the way to top heavy when I made the alignment chart. If we go back to the alignment chart, and I like to drag it over here, we see Sly is here, a bit in from top heavy.
Yeah, and especially for a Sly team, it's extremely wide, right?
That's a hell of a relativity.
Yeah, right.
And Duskull and Pumpkaboo. So I think Duskull and Pumpkaboo both came at least once this season. My Pumpkaboo, it was choice banded. It clicked Seed Bomb. I think it clicked Shadow Sneak once.
Love that. Oh my god, that was so much fun to watch. I know we already talked about this, but I gotta say it on the video for the fans. Yeah. So, your team doesn't love Trick Room.
I played against Trick Room week 1, and I thought I brought good prep for it, and I won. Therefore, it must have been good.
Yeah. Well, also, okay, so good players make good plays, and also I think, sometimes.
I think the other bit, which we don't really cover as much, is to the degree to which Room Service, Iron Ball, and Power items have contributed to Trick Room and Counter Trick Room. If Jordan had made playoffs and we were talking about his team more, I believe he used Power items and Room Service a couple times. I used it a couple times. I used it on Surfetched, I used it on Aggron, I think I used it on another one as well, but I don't remember what it was.
Yeah,
But I also
and
never.
that's kind of
I think only the aggro never hit the field with it.
yeah, it's an interesting double-edged sword, and Jordan and I kind of talked about this in our video, and you and I spoke about it before we started recording too, where when you prep so hard to succeed under Trick Room, that gives the opposing coach more options
Yeah.
too, right? Like,
Well, I mean, that's
if
why I think that if we go back to the first slide and compare it, the second slide and compare it to the third, how to top seed is to have a Trick Room mon that works outside of Trick Room. And then how to
Right.
hard Trick Room is to have mons that don't really work. Super great outside of Trick Room. I think Marowaks are the strongest example of that, because they are super succeed or lose. If you run fast Marowak, it will die to everything, and if you run slow Marowak, it will live everything.
right.
That's like really where the big difference is. And then this is like what's a Trick Room? I'd never heard of Trick Room
Yeah.
before.
Yeah, and if you consider using Trick Room sort of like Jordan and I discussed, like, okay, you want to set up Trick Room, I'm going to use that turn to either use setup moves or to just hit you really hard, right? Then
If you're using one turn to set up Trick Room with a mon that's passive, and then I'm killing your mon that's next to it, and then I'm killing the mon that's next to that the next turn, and I'm killing the mon that's next to that the next turn, and in that turn you've killed one or two of mine, I got two mons left, and you got a Trick Room setter.
right, exactly. And I lost my train of thought now.
Or if you set dual screens and then your Trick Room turns run out, and I just focus down your Trick Room setter, same diff, but the other way
Right,
around.
okay. Yeah, so to go back to the last slide, if we can occasionally, not all the time obviously, but if we can consider using Trick Room almost like a wasted turn, right?
Yeah.
That might be a little bit of a stretch. Imprison is really a wasted turn, right? Because
Yeah.
if you see something like Articuno or Sigilyph come out and you're thinking Imprison Trick Room and they use Imprison, the game is over, right?
Yeah.
Because that mon is dead.
One of the biggest counters to that was in Dynamax. There was a lot of ways to have Pokemon that could use Imprison well, because I remember running. I was a Scarf Gardevoir. It had Trick Room, it had Moonblast, and it had Psyshock or Psychic. So I clicked Imprison on the Scarf, and I imprisoned the opposing Pokemon's Moonblast and Trick Room on the same turn. I imprisoned both of their moves, and I Dynamaxed it and got 2 kills. But outside of Dynamax, and having those really good, like those mons that have really good offensive matchups, that's not really that much easy. It's not easy to do.
Right.
Like, Imprison is such a high roll thing that is also just terrible when you're not getting it. Like, imprisoning Protect is great if you do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you live to tell the tale, right?
Yeah. And then if you
Because
get
these
like
mons are
Encore or
also
something,
relatively frail.
I should run Imprison Encore, then I can't lose to Encore.
Yeah, that's the strat.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting to look at these and to talk about it, because Trick Room can be so oppressive.
Yeah. Sorry, the thing I wanted to say about Duskull and Pumpkaboo, both of them have Shadow Sneak, and that allowed them to imprison and then also still have something to do.
Right.
Because if you don't have a Trick Room, or you're not fast, sorry, if you don't have a priority move, or you're not fast, or you're just really passive and like weak, then you're not going to do anything with that turn. You need to have something a little bit extra, and being fast or having Shadow Sneak or other priority moves is a great way to do something with an Imprison mod.
Right, and I talked about this with Sora and Goose also. It doesn't matter if Trick Room is set up or not if I'm clicking priority moves.
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely. I mean, that's why I wanted Grookey.
Yeah. Sorry, rules are rules.
I blame it on America not being even further behind than I thought it was.
Bro, yeah. Yeah, so what else do we have here?
Look, I think that we saw Imprison come out. I used Pumpkaboo to threaten Imprison and then actually just get kills,
Yes.
which is like, the 3D chess of it.
Yeah, the threat of Imprison is almost better than Imprison itself, right?
Yeah. But you should probably consider running Imprison even if you just plan on clicking the attacking move, because, yeah. Also, I think Ghosts, that's the other thing. Ghost types can imprison, other mons can't, because they can just fake you out.
Yeah, Ghost type Trick Room setter is also very strong, as we see on slide 2.
I mean, we only saw 2 of them, right?
And they're on the two of the strongest teams, right? Two of
Right,
the
but
three
we see 5
four
psychic
strongest.
types.
True.
2 fairies, you know. 2 flying types. Levitate.
Yeah.
Clearly, levitate is the synergy. You know, the ground immunity. That was what really mattered. Because then you can't get earthquaked.
Yeah.
Nah.
So I guess let's go
Yeah,
back to
focus
the
also
original
really good.
question.
Yeah.
To wrap this up, is there
Trick Room
mushroom?
good? Is there mushroom? There, it does seem like there might be mushroom. By which I mean, we're expecting Fungus to sweep every single game of playoffs. Duskull Fungus lead, 100% win rate.
Yeah. So I think the things we learned this season, Trick Room is good sometimes.
Yep.
Sometimes it's not. Imprison, rarely good.
Imprison, rarely good. Threat of Imprison, decent.
Yes.
Which is also true about the threat of Trick Room, as we saw with Dustron.
Yeah. And I think the real lesson we learned here is it's not about the trick rooms you set. It's about the friends you make along the way.
You mean the friends whose relationships you ruin with because you then encore them with your Spritzy, and then
Yes.
they stop having fun.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the real lesson we learned, is that encore is bullshit.
Agreed.
So thank you
All
guys
right.
for watching. This has been Daddy, I've been the child. And leave a like, comment down below what you think is your favorite Trick Room moment. And yeah,